the poorest families through their welfare changes, or the swinging cuts to nurseries and schools and colleges because of their cuts to education. So all I would say to George Osborne is, you've given this policy, you've published this policy in some detail, it'll benefit a tiny number of people across the country. Why don't you come clean with the millions of more people who are going to have their colleges and their nurseries and their schools either closed or cut, and the millions of families, vulnerable and poor families, who are going to suffer because of your plans? It's time they come clean with the pain that they want to deliver, not just the gain they want to deliver to a very small number of families. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Clegg, you say you're being clear and candid about your tax and spending plans, but there's no detail in here at all about how you plan to cut £12 billion from government departmental budgets. Can you give us any examples of the sort of cuts that might involve? And secondly, why should voters trust you to deliver any of this when you broke your central promise of the last election and went on to treble tuition fees?
Well, firstly, bear in mind that this financial year we are delivering close to £12 billion worth of reductions in departmental spending in 1 year. In 1 year. Danny Alexander's doing that. So we're saying we're going to do that over 2 years. So actually this approach is half as sharp. It's half the amount of reduction on Whitehall expenditure compared to what we have been doing just this financial year. It is easily manageable. Danny's been doing it year in, year out. He's already sketched out £10 billion worth of efficiency savings within Whitehall on top of billions more. So, and then it's easily done. Of course you don't. No, I mean, we've been quite open about it. You don't cross the T's and dot the I's on a comprehensive spending review until you've had, guess what, the comprehensive spending review, which happens at the beginning of the Parliament. And on the latter point, I mean, look at your front page. Look at the front page of your Liberal Democrat, the copy of your well-thumbed copy of the Liberal Democrat manifesto from 2010. And what you will have found on there was 4 priorities: raising the point at which people pay income tax to £10,000. We've done more than that. You can now earn £10,600 without paying any income tax. £2.5 billion put into schools to help the most disadvantaged children through the pupil premium. Done, not least because of David. Thirdly, fixing the economy. I don't think we've done too badly on that. And fourthly, it was pushing for political reform, which we most certainly did. Of course, you can remind me, as many people do, on the one policy that we weren't able to deliver. I think many fair-minded folk would actually recognise the many, many, many more policies, including all of the policies on the front page of our manifesto, that we've religiously stuck to through the last 5 years. And on the balance, by the way, of tax and spend and departmental reductions, what is striking is that what we're basically setting out here, amongst all the impenetrable detail of all of these numbers, is broadly speaking, a continuation of the balanced mix between spending reductions and tax increases, which we have insisted on over the last 5 years. We are the party who are saying we should continue to do broadly the same to finish the job. It's the Conservatives, despite all their posters of their Deutsche Autobahn, who actually want to swerve wildly off to the right. Why on earth, having done what they've done with us for 5 years, have they now decided they want to take such an ideologically different approach? And I think for those who are looking for some continuity and stability in British politics, you're not going to get that from a right-wing swerve of the Conservative Party or a left-wing swerve of the Labour Party. You're going to get it from the plan that we're presenting to you today. Yeah, I'll go. Yeah.
Hi, Jason Gross from the Daily Mail. Your mansion tax at one point was going to raise 1.7 billion. Now it's going to raise 1 billion. And you seem to be planning to whack pensioners and savers to sort of make up some of the difference. I just wonder why you'd made that choice.
How are we going to whack pensioners?
Well, I think you're taking benefits off some of them. You're cutting the threshold for capital gains tax as well, I think, aren't you?
You're saying you can still get £2,500 in the capital gains system without paying tax. And I think I meet many retired folk who are well off, who say they would like to make a contribution to make sure that their children and their grandchildren don't have to continue to shoulder the debts and the mistakes of this generation. I meet many pensioners who are higher rate or additional rate taxpayers who say, look, we don't need to be paid for by lower income folk. We don't need our TV licence and our winter fuel payments paid for. We can do it ourselves. And I actually think it is perfectly fair to ask those who are wealthy and retired. It's 5%, by the way, of all pensioners that we're talking about here. So it's the top 5% of pensioners, the wealthiest, who pay the higher rate and additional rate. We're simply saying we're not going to ask people on much, much lower incomes to pay their TV licences and winter fuel payments. And why I think the Conservatives have got this so wrong is that actually many people in that category, that top 5%, understand that, for the sake of society as a whole, for the sake of the life chances of their own children and grandchildren, they want to make a bit of an extra contribution as well. That's why I think what we're doing is not, as you put it, nobbling anybody. We're just taking a fair change to the system so that people who don't need their universal benefits paid for them don't any longer do so.
Sorry, on the mansion tax, or is it?
So on the mansion tax, as David has set out, we have set out today the lower bands, 2.5 to 3 million, 3 million to 4 to 5. David can set them out, where the payments made by people in those categories will be much lower than some of the breathless predictions that I've heard, much lower. And we will then consult to ensure that the total revenue generated is £1 billion. You're right, that is less than originally mooted, but because as we've worked up the idea, as we have looked at what we think is reasonable and fair, we think this is a reasonable, fair way of doing it. It shouldn't scare the horses. It is in effect taking the same principle as you already have in the property tax system, council tax, and extending it in bands upwards. There's no rational reason why lots of people in lower value houses should pay property tax through the council tax system in bands, but people in much higher value property should not. So we're in effect extending that same banded approach that you already have in council tax to higher value properties. And I certainly find, as I explain that to people who are sort of concerned about what this means, they accept that it's not fair to have a property tax system which ends at around £700,000. It's not fair that a family home in Lewisham pays the same property tax as an oligarch in a vast sort of mansion. And all we're saying is we'll extend the same fair banded approach up the value chain. Do you want to just remind folk of David of the?
Yes, I mean they're all in the briefing paper, but for £2 to £2.5 million properties, the charge is £2,000 per year or less, because we're setting the upper end of the range. And then for 2.5 million to 3, the charge would be 3,500 per year or less. By the way, the other point that I'd make on your question about pensioners is that what you may be underplaying in this package is the value to pensioners as well of the further increase that we're proposing in the personal income tax allowance, which we've also costed in this, unlike the Conservatives. And as you're aware, during this Parliament, the pensioner allowance has been above the personal allowance, so pensioners haven't actually gained from that increase. In the next Parliament, they will gain from all of that very significant increase in the allowance, and that's going to mean that for lower income and middle income pensioners, there's a big bonus from this manifesto from our tax changes.
We'll get around everybody, don't we?
Michael Sellers from The Times. I wonder if I'd ask a bit more about the 12 billion welfare cuts from the Conservatives. And Mr. Clegg or Mr. Laws, in your, either over the 5 years talking to the Conservatives over fiscal events, or indeed just trying to put yourself in their mind frame where these savings would come from, what's your best bet and where they're going to find some of those 12 billion if you had to name some?
Well, I'll let David add a thing, but I remember in which autumn statement was it? Was it in autumn statement 2013? You can find this on the public record. George Osborne announced that he wanted £10 billion cut from the benefit system. So I asked him, I said, well, where's this going to come from? I didn't have the faintest idea. So actually we ended up in that autumn statement reducing the welfare bill by £3 billion. So I think was part of a pattern, which is to sort of just, declare some great big number and not really care too much about who it might affect. And what we've always done is we have not, the Liberal Democrats, we're no slouches on welfare reform. We have reduced the welfare bill very considerably during this Parliament. We've done so with our active support, but we've done it in a smart way, in a fair way, and in a way which always increases the incentive to work, which doesn't just sort of randomly, which is the Conservative plan, take the equivalent of £1,500 away from 8 million of the poorest families in this country. These are, by the way, the strivers. These are people who work hard. These are a lot of people in low incomes who are working. These are not people to these are not layabouts. These are exactly the kind of people who the Conservative Party used to stand up for, who aspire, who work hard, who do the right thing for their family and friends, but just need a little bit of help from the government because of the circumstances they find themselves in. Or they're people who've lost a job and need a bit of help to get back into work. These are exactly the kind of aspirant, hard-working folk on low incomes who want to do better for them and their families, who we want to help, and the Conservatives want to hit. You couldn't say more about the difference in values between the two parties.
Yeah, I'd just say a couple of things. I mean, firstly, I think one of the real problems that the Tories have got in this policy area, having made this commitment about 12 billion some time ago, is that since then the projected levels of inflation in the future have fallen quite significantly. And as you'll know, one of the things that has allowed us to deliver some welfare cuts during this Parliament has been the under-indexation of large parts of the benefit system, which has therefore delivered savings spread across a large number of people. Now that possibility in a low inflation world goes out of the window, and as you know, George Osborne's policy, even of freezing benefits for 2 years, which would imply real cuts in the incomes of quite poor people, only saves £1 billion over the period of time that we're focused on. It means he's got 11 billion to find from other things. And Danny and I have been through every single line item of the welfare budget to see where future savings could be made. Most of them are extremely unpalatable, which is why we've come up only with this smaller package of £3 billion. Where the Conservatives will be driven on welfare savings, I think, is in 3 areas. Firstly, I think there's a serious risk to young people, and the Conservatives have looked many times, and as Nick said, tried to persuade us to make cuts for young people, including those in employment. So I think that young people have a lot to be worried about from the Conservative government. I think secondly, they're bound to look at the whole issue of child benefit and child tax credit. And there's a real risk that people on middle and higher incomes will suddenly find that the child benefit system becomes a means-tested system in the future. So I think a lot of ordinary families on middle incomes have a lot to be worried about. And of course, once you take into account that the job seekers allowance number of people on JSA has fallen a lot, and therefore there are limited savings you can make there, you're driven back to the other massive area of the benefits budget, people with disabilities, and they ought to be very worried indeed as well about the prospects of a Conservative government.
Nigel Morris from The Independent. Could I ask a question relating to fairness? Why have you decided to retain non-dom status, albeit with higher charges?
I think on non-dom, it's like everything else. You've got to strike the right balance. First, I should point out that the Labour Party ban turns out not to be a ban at all. As Ben Ball's admitted within hours, he actually thinks there is a role for allowing folk who want to come here, that want to retain ties to their own home country, to be able to do so and have that reflected in the tax system. Let me give you an example. I don't know, an engineer for a big Asian car company that have a plant here in Britain. They come over here to work for a while. They put up their flat back home to rent. It's not unreasonable to say that for the period of time that engineer is here, the rental income back home is not taxed through the British tax system. That's what the non-dom status grants. So, actually the Labour Party accept that there is such thing as a non-dom status. It would continue to do so even under their so-called ban. The second thing is, as we've set out today, or confirmed today, we have increased the levies paid by non-doms very considerably in this government and want to go further in the next Parliament. But of course we'll look at those areas where you need to change the system. It seems to me, for instance, it makes no sense at all to make non-dom status an inheritable sort of gift that you sort of inherit from your parents. There's absolutely no sense in that at all. So we would look to end that, and we'd be open to consulting on say that you have a sort of period of time, maybe quite I don't know. We can discuss this, but a period of time after which, if you're resident in the United Kingdom, non-dom status lapses automatically. Those are the kind of reforms we look at. But look, at the end of the day, we believe you've got to keep Britain open for business, but make sure it's not open to abuse, and that's the kind of balance we're trying to strike in the non-dom system.
Rob Hutton from Bloomberg. At the risk of being churlish about your lovely table, nothing says magic money tree quite like tax avoidance and evasion. You said that so far you've managed to raise £2 billion a year from that. One would have thought that with most things you get the low-hanging fruit in the early years and then it gets harder.